From Journey with VRD, you're listening to the Visions, Missions, and Manifestations podcast, the number one place for spirituality, healing, and transcendence. I'm your host, Vivian Raquel Dayan. Now let's get into it. On today's episode, we're breaking down the barriers between spirituality, psychology, psychedelics, and its influence on your ability to manifest. We have Rachel Esha here, who already has her master's and is on her way to becoming a licensed psychotherapist. Rachel embodies the Journey with VRD mission of becoming the futuristic human where the past or what may scare us just doesn't. Instead, she's an example of someone who's broken some societal norms, gone after her vision, and has made it her mission to empower those to do the same. Welcome, Rachel. We're so glad to have you here today. Let's kick off this podcast by diving in deep. Would you like to share some of your cultural background and upbringing?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Vivian. I appreciate it. Excited to be here, excited to talk about psychology, spirituality, manifestation. Um, my background, my parents are from Israel. So I grew up speaking Hebrew, speaking English, born in the US, was raised in New York. And I think where I was from, these concepts weren't so spoken about often, but organically, it's something that I naturally gravitated towards.
Do you know your astrological trio?
I love astrology. It's not one of the things that I'm super into, but I do know my sun sign is a Capricorn. My moon and rising are both Aquarius.
Oh, how cool. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing. It just gives our listeners a better idea of who is on the podcast. And so I wanted to talk about your journey to becoming who you are now. Was there a moment, maybe a societal norm you felt like you had to break, which led you on this path?
Um, well, I think I've always had a sense of rebellion internally. And that took breaking a lot of norms in terms of how I conduct myself, the people I surrounded myself with, and just exploring different versions of myself through the different paths that I took in life. I don't think I necessarily lived a very unconventional life. But I think that I always had a drive to strive to understand deeper parts of myself, and that drove me to experience a way of life that I think typically where I'm from, people don't usually navigate. There are very rigid gender roles and rigid ideas about how one should live their life, whether it's marriage or just it almost felt like life was scripted and should have been flowing in a certain way. But I kind of went against that current and did my own thing. So
I wonder what it was that gave you the confidence to kind of break that script and say, you know what, I'm going after my vision. I'm going after what feels right for me.
growing up, I still am a very intense emotional person. Having these intense feelings has led me to kind of discover that the path that everybody around me was taking felt a little too linear and a little too regimented, and I wanted to explore more. I think for me, my truth is always in the feelings, always in the emotions. And I think that started off sometimes in dark places, but led to very beautiful destinations. So to answer your question, it was all about the feelings and feeling maybe a little bit constricted and wanting to see beyond that constriction and experience life beyond that.
Yeah. And so I wonder what your first encounters with spirituality was. How did you get into spirituality? And then how do you mold that into your psychological studies?
So yeah, well, it's interesting because you don't really know something's going to happen to you. It kind of just happens. I was about 12 years old, and I was on a trip with I believe it was my school, and I was in the woods with another girl, and I had seen a UFO. And yeah, it was at the time I didn't know what it was. I didn't think anything of it until years later. I actually don't share this with anybody, so it's really intimate. But years later, I was exploring with psychedelics, and I was getting that download that I was having communication with the beings that were on that UFO. It's all happening. There's, a lot of research and evidence for extraterrestrial life. So it's interesting. I remember I was experiencing with psychedelics, and this was years later. Years later, I didn't think anything of the incident at the forest when I was 12. I didn't even realize or recognize it was a UFO. I think maybe I knew somewhere subconsciously that it was. So they were showing me codes to the human thought process and how different beings operate differently, and what, because of the level of consciousness they're vibrating on and the way they have constructed their reality, they actually communicate telepathically. One expression for them is like thousands of books for humans. So they're very, very advanced, very different than humans. But I do believe one day we will get there. They are the future version of us.
Have you ever read Dolores Cannon's books?
Oh yeah, I love Dolores Cannon. It's amazing. I think everything is connected with our soul contract. I think our experiences, even though we do manifest everything, I think that we come into this life already with certain insights and passions embedded into us and our purpose. I think that naturally our experiences in the 3D unfold according to those pre-written passions that our soul is supposed to, have and go through, and the lessons we're supposed to learn. Yeah, I think that there was a reason that I was there at the forest, and there was a reason that I explored psychedelics. There was a reason that I got into this field, got my master's in the field that I chose to, and yeah.
At 12 years old, this happens, you see a UFO, and now how did you get into spirituality? What prompted this awakening?
So the awakening, truthfully, for me, it was mentioning before the emotions. I think I've experienced a lot of depression and dense emotions in my life, and I think that led to my awakening. Actually, mental health in general, being a mental health clinician, people who struggle with certain disorders or like depression, anxiety, I think it's beneath that, it's truly a gift because of the way we operate in this dimension and all these societal ideas that we have. I think it suppresses, we're told to take medication right away. We're told to kind of, let's get the symptoms under control. But beyond all of that, there's beauty in learning what needs to be mended through these dense emotions that are coming up. So for me, my spiritual journey started by exploring these dense emotions and feelings, and whether it was anxiety or depression. And so it started at a young age where I kind of wanted to heal myself. And so I then began to learn that healing is very much possible, and I wanted to share that healing with the world.
Wow, I love that. And as a practitioner who brings psychedelics into the picture, do you mind explaining what they are and how they're different from other substances?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of research in terms of why our brain is more malleable with psychedelics as opposed to other drugs. Because if we could do that, then we could probably mimic that component, and we can take a substance that does not create the hallucinations, but does allow for the brain to be more malleable. So in terms of the exact science on that, I'm not going to get into it. But in terms of how psychedelics influences your psyche and your ego, I can share a little bit about that. It's very interesting that there's a journey that happens when you're on psychedelics, and it looks different for everybody. And it certainly depends on the types of psychedelics that you're using. I'm going to speak about psilocybin, which is mushrooms. So basically, when you ingest them, what ends up happening is something called ego dissolution happens, and your egoic defenses that are usually very active during our regular state of consciousness, like right now you and I talking, they're lowered, and your ego goes into a regressed state where it's not as active. You're not defending against the concepts that are implemented into your state of being, which, by the way, are not just your concepts. They're intergenerationally transmitted through your grandparents, your parents, your great-grandparents. So all of these ideas, these fears, these limitations, these beliefs, everything that we have, our ego is just basically trying to protect against them, because our thoughts are just in a manifestation of our survival mechanisms. Everything that's cerebral, all of our thoughts, most of it is ego, most of it is protection, most of it is survival. And when you go into the psychedelic experience, when you ingest these medicines, I like to call it medicine because I truly believe they are medicinal, they start to fade away. And what happens is you become the awareness beyond these egoic defenses. And when you become the awareness, you're no longer avoiding what the ego is trying to protect against. You're going within, you're tuning into, you're tapping into what's actually happening internally. And I can give you an example of something and related to manifestation if you're interested. So
Please.
yeah, I mean, since we're a woman, weight is a big thing for us. And just societally, all the messages that we get in terms of weight and connecting it to our worth, our value. So I think diet culture and suppressing and avoiding what this weight is trying to tell us, I think actually manifests more weight. You can lose weight by dieting, but what ends up happening is you're losing it because from self-loathing, from a place of non-acceptance. So you end up gaining it, you end up obsessing over it, and you end up really not being in flow and restricting. And what happened on one of my psychedelic experiences actually was the awareness of that. I remember looking at my body and thinking, I have this extra layer of fat here. I don't actually like it. I don't want it. That's okay. That's not going to change. But what is it trying to tell me? What is it trying to protect against? Let me give it love so that the energy of love and acceptance comes into my awareness. So now I'm able to understand what it's trying to tell me, what it's talking to me about. And now I can command it out of my experience because I've accepted what it's trying to protect me from. And no, thank you. I don't need your protection anymore. And why psychedelics is helpful for this, for example, this was one example, is it helps you accept the feelings and the emotions and the trapped trauma beneath and beyond the anxiety surrounding certain things in your life, like having an extra layer of fat and feeling uncomfortable with it, or anything. It really can be anything. And you're really able to tune into yourself and to recognize who you are beyond the programs that you're conditioned to believe about yourself, and associating those with the value. You're able to truly tap into your divinity.
And so when you were discussing the definition of psychedelics, you use the word malleable, makes the brain malleable quite often. Do you want to talk a little bit about why we want the brain to be a little bit more malleable in when it comes to healing?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, like we were talking about subconscious programming, and those programs are so rigid, they're so embedded in our psyche. And that's what keeps us living the same life, the same day, and recreating the same affirming beliefs. And why we want the brain to be malleable is because when something is malleable, you have room for creation. There's room for creating something beyond. Just like with manifestation, when you're more open and when you're more receptive, there's room for creating what it is you're trying to manifest. It's all connected. It's when your brain is malleable, you're able to reprogram it, and the new programs that you're running on is more aligned with the intentions that you're trying to manifest.
For sure. One of the 5 dimensions of ascension, or like your 5 dimensions to your next level, that I teach is the rebirth. And what the rebirth is literally embodying the version of you who has the thing that you're currently manifesting and becoming her or him now. Taking on those habits, start speaking the speech that that version of you would speak when our brains are more malleable and more susceptible to that change. Maybe in meditation, maybe in hypnosis, and of course with psychedelics, then we are able to become the version of us that we're trying to be way quicker, collapse time, and actually live that reality. So I love the way that you put it.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I love that you talk to your clients about that and you bring this onto the podcast because it's so important. There's many ways to get there, right? To have this new self-concept. But I like to think about it in terms of the subconscious mind, because we can I think our thoughts are, like I said, defenses much of the time. And we can think our way into a different version of ourselves, but we don't actually believe it. So like you said, when your brain is more malleable and more receptive to information, you're embodying that experience before it's actually happening. You're embodying that version of yourself before it's actually manifesting in the 3D. And then naturally, those events and that version of yourself unfolds.
So, something I heard that I'd love to hear your opinion and your explanation on is when you do any healing work, you're actually healing 7 generations past as well as 7 generations future. What's your take on that? And can you explain, elaborate?
Wow, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think that our lineage is a huge aspect of our identity. I like to think of identity as comprised of macro and micro systems. Macro systems are our gender, religion, all these societal concepts that create our ideas and beliefs about who we are. And micro is more of like the family unit and the ideas that we've learned in our family structure. And the macro and micro systems interact, and then they create your state of being. And I think when you're healing, you're really recreating and reframing those concepts. And it's like having a child. I like to think of it as a mother, as a father. When you nurturing your child in a different way than past generations, then you're also healing the parts of your ancestors that were broken, and you're mending those parts through the present. And of course, healing affects future generations because it always trickles down. So I definitely agree with that. Healing yourself heals everybody, heals your ancestors, heals your children, your future children, and everything a reflection of you. Everything is a mirror. And I think it all narrows down to yourself.
Beautiful. So well said. And to take this even a dot deeper, we could even say that when you do heal something, especially generational trauma, you're also recoding your DNA. And so, how you appear, how your genetic makeup is, and maybe the way your kids come out is going to be altered based off this healing. It's not just an internal thing. I know that your philosophy is your external world is mirrored by what's going on inside of you. And so you can literally change the physicality of your outside world by doing the inner work.
Yeah, that is definitely I think it's the main philosophy that I have. So you're right on the nail. For example, when you have relationship problems, that's reflective of your inner relationship. When you have problems with financial issues, that's reflective of your limiting beliefs and your self-esteem and your self-worth, because, it's coded in you to believe you're not worthy of having that abundance. And everything is just a reflection. And I think a lot of people say that, and it's very well known in this community, but I think it's the essence of everything. Genuinely, manifestation, mental health, the ability to create and create consciously. And that's why I think that shadow work is a big thing. I bring that into my practice as well. Healing your inner child, healing the parts of yourself that feels unworthy, the parts of yourselves that are afraid, healing all of the experiences that you've had and that your ancestors have had that are embedded in you, and truly getting to the root of your belief system. And you can do that through meditation is a wonderful tool for that. Joe Dispenza, he's lovely. I love his work. He always talks about that a physiological state can produce a physiological fact. So it's all about the state of being. Once you get tap into the frequency of the state of being that aligns what you're trying to manifest, your thoughts shift naturally. They flow to that state of being. Your vessel is more expansive. It's able to receive more information, new codes, new insights, and naturally your thought process shifts. So I think everything is about the internal state of being, the internal state of vibration that you're on, which can be done, like we said, through meditation. It can be done through hypnosis. It can be done through many, many ways. And there's no right or wrong way to get there. I like to incorporate different modalities and practices into my life to get there. But I think people get that confused, where sometimes it's like they want to start from the thoughts. And there are different techniques that do that. You can't really trick your brain. You can't trick yourself into believing something it doesn't believe.
So true. I definitely agree with you. And what I teach is to first become the thing, because then the thoughts will change. When you start taking the action, your thoughts start shifting. And then if you do want to go on the route of like, let me just change my thoughts first, it's always providing proof to the thought. So I always say affirmations don't work, because if you're going around telling yourself, I'm a billionaire, and you're not, there's going to be the subconscious little voice being like, but I'm not a billionaire. And so it's going to reinforce actually the opposite. And so instead of saying what you are when you're not really in that energy yet, you actually ask yourself why you are that thing. So, why am I a billionaire? And then when you start listing off reasons why you're so wealthy, when you do say, I am a billionaire, you actually say it with a little bit more confidence and a little bit more of a convincing attitude. Hey there, it's Vivian, and I'm briefly interrupting this podcast episode to share some of the changes my clients are making through their journey of coaching with VRD. Here are their success stories. I recently had a VIP client graduate her 3-month coaching program with me, and we actually celebrated by doing a VIP day in person where I curated the most perfect manifestation day in New York City with me, where she stayed overnight in a 5-star hotel. It was so much fun and the perfect way to celebrate. When she started out with me, she was out of a job, she was scared, full of anxiety, did not know where her next dollar, where her next check would come from. And within month 1, she actually manifested an abundant amount of the most aligned job opportunities, the most perfect job opportunities. And not only did she manifest abundance in career, but at the end of the 3 months, she manifested abundance in different areas of her life, including expanding her family. She's about to become a grandmother, which is huge. She manifested not only 1 puppy, but 2 adorable, cute puppies, a trip to Arizona with her 2 daughters, as well as finding money in the most unexpected places. Going on this journey with her has been such an experience that really fills me up with so much joy, knowing that the journey with VRD manifestation strategy, 5 dimensions to your ascension, really, really works. And she's just the proof of that. If you are ready to take your entire life to the next level, where you manifest a life that doesn't only look good, that doesn't only excite you to talk about with your friends, but actually feels better than it looks, one that you're excited to wake up to, then go to www.journeywithvrd.com and you can select your journey to work with me. I am so excited to be on this path with you. I'm so excited to take you to your next level, for you to ascend into a life that you are just so grateful for. So if it sounds like something that is calling your name, you're ready to just elevate, then I cannot wait to connect with you. I cannot wait to see you. I cannot wait to take you there. And I'll see you soon. So,
Yeah, totally.
you talk a lot about how you intertwine psychology and spirituality, and I want to hear a little bit more of your take on that. How do you bring spirituality to psychology? And just as a side note, something I heard recently, which I absolutely love, is that science is finally catching up to spirituality. So, what do you have to say on that?
I love that question. It goes back to what we just spoke about, just the shadow work and just the concepts associated with the belief systems that you hold. I think the for me, the thing that ties the two is the psychedelic experience. I think that's what allowed me to first see that these are the same thing. They're not actually different. And the reason that they're the same is because both are tapping into the subconscious mind, which is where creation is. And with psychology, the terms are different, but it's the same concept. It's being a conscious creator and moving through life lighter, with less dense emotions that are literally weighing heavy on you. And spirituality is all about that. It's all about vibrating higher. It's all about getting to a different state of being. And with psychology, you do that through talk therapy or, whatever modality you're using. And with spirituality, maybe you can do that through energy work, Reiki, or different forms of healing, sound baths. All of these things are really just to get you to tap into the vibrational state that you want to get to. And like I said, the terms we're using now are very much spiritual, but in the psychology community, it's the same thing, just different terms. It's getting the symptoms under control, right? Which is the same thing. It's just feeling lighter, flowing through life with your vessel. One sign of a lack of mental health is rigidity with personality. And
Mm.
it's interesting 'cause tied to spirituality, it's something that blocks you is the rigidness and the limiting beliefs. And both in psychology and spirituality are essentially trying to do the same thing. It's trying to make you more malleable, make you more flexible in your thought process and your personality. So I have a hard time differentiating between spirituality and psychology, to be honest with you. I think they're the same thing.
I love that. And so I wonder what your take is on the future of psychedelics in therapy.
It's only going to expand because of how malleable your brain is on psychedelics. One psychedelic experience can create such profound insight that probably would take many therapeutic interventions. One trip on psilocybin, MDMA, whatever your choice of psychedelics is, can actually bring you to the same place of several therapy sessions. And so if you combine the two, can you imagine if you combine the two, which I think is going to be the
Exactly.
future, which is happening now, we will be very powerful beings.
Yeah, I could just say from my own experience that one ceremony for me healed years and years of being on anxiety medication. And I really agree with what you're saying in that bringing psychedelics to therapy collapses the time it takes for one to not only heal, but also to understand and gain the lesson. I feel like we go through the same big T, small t traumas, or we have to move through the same lessons over and over and over again until we get the lesson, until we state the lesson. It's something I do a lot with my clients. I'm like, okay, state the lesson, now act on it. Because until we do, it'll keep showing up. If psychedelics weren't in the picture, what would you say somebody would have to do or shift internally in order to see something that isn't so visible to the average human, like a UFO, like an alien? I mean, there's so many other things in this category. Like, I think the same person who could see the alien, the UFO, is also seeing auras and also seeing maybe other entities that are out there that you don't see with the physical eye.
So actually, when I saw it, I was 12. I was not on psychedelics.
Thank
Uh,
God.
Thank God for that. Yeah, my brain was still developing. I'd never thought about this question, so it's gonna be interesting to answer. I'll tell you what, I think that the matrix of life keeps you very much asleep. And so when you're asleep, you don't see beyond the veil. It's very hard. And I think it takes a glimpse into seeing beyond the programs. And that might be societal norms or concepts or ideas that we've adhered to, and connecting through, it sounds cliche, but love. And it's not cliche. Love is one of the highest vibrational frequencies you can be in and embody. And it's experiences with connecting with yourself. And what can allow someone to get there if they haven't already been there? I'm not sure. I don't have the answer to that. But I think that could help people see and have downloads or insights beyond the programs of the matrix, getting heart centered. I think it's all about being heart centered.
Hmm.
So tapping into that heart centered vibration.
And also to just like elaborate a little bit on the heart center, like what that is truth. And if we're going to
Mhm.
stick with being heart centered, right? If that's going to be our shining light, then we have to peel the layers of what isn't truth. And when we start to do that, like uncomfortable emotions, like you said, at a young age, you had all these intense emotions. And as you went on this journey to heal them, you were peeling back the layers of false stories, of limiting beliefs, of fears, of just whatever was blocking and stopping you from living in that heart centered, truthful, authentic, aligned space. And it's true. It's when you do that work and you get closer and closer to your truth, do you actually see truth, not with your
Yes.
physical eyes, but with your maybe your third eye, or maybe something else awakens within you that allows you to grasp it. I know not everybody's so visual. Some people sense it, some people feel it, some people hear it. And so I wonder, are you a seer or more auditory or more like you feel it?
When I'm just, everyday insights, I think it's a feeling for me.
It's
It's
feeling.
definitely a
I love that.
feeling.
I love that.
Yeah, I have seen things too, but for me, it's mostly a feeling. And what about you? How do you connect most to your truth?
I am very
To the
visual. I was actually
Okay.
born blind, but I have an
Wow.
inner sight. Yes, I think that is what helped me with my inner sight. First 5 years of my life, not being able to see really well or at all, and really developing that sixth sense of sight. inner
Yeah.
sight. I think we all have all of it, but I definitely lean closest to inner sight. My theory on how to get to unlift the veil, step out of the matrix, I agree with
Yeah.
everything you said. So I definitely agree with waking up to it. I also will say that I was a huge Lacey Phillips fan. Huge Lacey Phillips fan. I don't know if you ever heard of her, To Be Magnetic, back in 2017. She wasn't as big as she is now. I heard her on the Goop podcast, became obsessed. And then she rolled out in the pandemic coaching, and I started working one on one with one of her coaches. As I was doing all of this healing work, these gifts started to awaken. And this is pre any psychedelic experience. With that being said, she would talk on her podcast all the time about these gifts. And I'd be like, what is she talking about? What is she talking about? What gifts? And she'd get a little bit more deeper into it with each podcast. I think she was getting more comfortable speaking about it as well. And I didn't fully understand and was on this whole journey. I was doing her programs like Unblocked Inner Child, Unblocked Shadow, Unblocked Money, Unblocked Love, working with her one on one coaches, listening to her podcast every single week. And then, bam, one day it all unfolded like a rocket ship. Like all of a sudden, seeing auras, all of a sudden, I have a crazy entity story. I could totally
Yeah,
share that
I'd love to
too.
hear it.
Long story short, I was sleeping in my apartment, and then in the middle of the night, like around 3 a.m., my dog started barking. So I woke up. I'm a really light sleeper. And I decided to go to the bathroom. So I go to the bathroom, and on my way out of the bathroom, I had this long hall before you go into a room. And I promise you, I see an old man, white, old, like a ton of wrinkles, washed out. His face didn't, it looked faded almost. And his eyes were so blue, they were glowing. And I look at him and I said, Vivian, you're sleeping. This is a dream. This is not real. But I'm staring at him. He's hunchback. I'll never forget. And he's right by a closet that was opened, a little key part. And so I'm like, no, 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 I'm sleeping. I go back into my bed and I'm like, that was so real. So I said out loud, I said, if somebody's in my apartment, make noise. Maybe it's a real person, right? I had a bookshelf. I hear every single book fall. My dog is barking, barking, barking. So I was scared shitless and I popped my head into the hall. I don't, as if he couldn't see me, right? Like my whole body was hidden, but just my face. I peek through and nothing's there. No one's there. Don't see it anymore. I look at the bookshelf, not one book fell. And I knew it was an entity at that point. And I remember like going to sleep being like, I'm just gonna go on TikTok. So I think thoughts of nothing, nothing of importance, and he won't know that I'm scared. I ended up like talking to somebody about this and learning so much about it and learning how to protect yourself from lower frequencies and things like that all started to happen as I was doing the work on myself, peeling back the layers. The only thing that To Be Magnetic didn't give me that I wish that it did was integrating it all. I had all this coming so fast because of all the work I crammed in a short period of time that I didn't know how to comprehend it. I didn't know what to do with it. And if I didn't have a coach, I think I would have thought I was going insane.
Would you call it a spiritual awakening? Could we call it that?
I would say it was one. It wasn't my big one. I've had so many, and I think so many people experienced one during the pandemic as well. I've had so many spiritual awakenings. But once this happened, kind of like you. So you were like 12 years old, you had this sighting of the UFO, but then like you didn't actually awaken to the whole experience until later in life. So once this happened, all of a sudden, my whole childhood made sense.
When you're beginning the journey, sometimes these entities can attach themselves to your experience.
Mm.
So it's interesting that you say that. I have to ask you, do you know
Yeah.
why that happens, or do you have any idea of why sometimes it can feel dark at first and scary, and you can experience things that are more lower vibrational.
Mm. There's so many different answers I could
What
give on
happened to me?
this. It happened to
Yeah.
you. We have to talk about it.
I didn't see someone physically, but I would get the vision. I think I'm also auditory.
Auditory.
I would when I first began this journey, I was hearing these things and I was scared, but I was hearing the energies and whatever entities they were. And I was the start of my journey. And I actually knew consciously that because I'm awakening to something, I'm receiving this. I
Gift.
don't remember exactly what I was hearing, but yeah, gifts. Exactly. I was receiving these gifts. I remember asking it to shut down at one point. because it was scary.
So many people do
And it
that.
didn't, yeah, but I opened it back up, but in a way that it wasn't coming in as it was coming more in as downloads and intuition. I think I commanded that experience out of my reality and more, and I integrated it better. Like you were saying, the integration is a
Mm.
difficult
It's
thing.
so key. It's so key. I think without integration, you can lose your freaking mind, and you need the right tools. You need the right coach. You need to speak to the right person, therapist, whoever. I'll answer different aspects of your question. So, first of all, there's so
Mm,
many ways to get an entity attached to you. And the number one way is gossiping. It's a
really?
very spiritual idea. Think about it like this: you hear a juicy piece of tea, right? You hear the tea. What do you want to do right when you hear it? Your natural instinct is to tell somebody else. Why? Because it doesn't feel good to the soul. You have allowed now an entity, a negative entity, in Hebrew we call it like a Yetzer Hara or a Satan, into your soul, into your body. And so right away you tell it to somebody else. But now what have you done? You've given somebody else this entity. And now somebody else is going to feel the urge. And now somebody else, and it's going to keep popping, 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 going from one person to the other. I like to think of it like hot potato. It's so hot, like, oh my God, get rid of it, give it to somebody else. One way to not have this attached to you or come into your being is by not gossiping, but there's so many other ways that this can happen. It's not just through gossip. When I had this entity come into my apartment that night that I just shared, Taylor Page, Angels and Amethyst, who told me to go into my closet every single night, I'd say out loud, I am the highest frequency and nothing below my frequency is allowed in this space. And
You
I
have to
would do that
command it out of
every
your,
single night.
you have to command it out of your
You have to command
experience.
it. You have to command it. You have to show it who's boss. So there's different ways that they could attack you, just to answer the question. And I think we open to our gifts as we come to truth, because as we come to truth, we see clearer. The more you peel back the layers and the more you come back to your truth. And what I mean by peel back the layers is the more you heal the gunk. And I don't mean get rid, right? Like, let's be real. In science, it states you can't destroy or create anything. Everything is just molded and everything is just recycled and turned into
I agree.
something else. So it's not that we're getting rid of the gunk, we're just turning the gunk, the shit, into treasure. We're taking that and we're owning it and we're seeing it differently and we're using our pain as a superpower, using our pain as motivation. We're seeing our pain, healing the pain, forgiving the pain, and maybe not feeling it anymore. Maybe now it boosts us. It makes us feel stronger. It makes us feel more confident. And when we do that, we actually gain the gifts, because really the holiest thing you can do is heal. Because when you own who you are, you give so many other people permission to be themselves. Whereas
I agree.
otherwise they'd be scared to.
I agree, and it's
So
felt on a subconscious level. You know,
yeah.
when you're with someone who you feel is authentically connected, you have more freedom, whether you don't even consciously realize, to be your authentic self as well. It's safe. It's safe to own those parts. And that's an interesting theory of coming to your gifts by seeing beyond the veil. And that's exactly how I look at it. I didn't think of it before you even asked me, but entering it, it's exactly what I think happens. It's seeing beyond the matrix. It's the same thing as the matrix of the mind, which I like to call the egoic constructs and the egoic defenses. And when you're running on those programs of protection and survival, then all you can see is through the lens of those defenses, and you can't really create through seeing beyond that and being conscious of your experience and being mindful. And so I definitely agree, and it relates to psychology by the matrix of the mind. It's very interesting. I think everybody has these gifts, but I think
Mm,
that some people are more open to the journey and depth of, which I think a lot of people in the spiritual community don't realize, is that there's so much pain in spirituality as well. It's not all love and light, and it's the yin and yang. And so I think some people are more avoidant of going within, and so they stay asleep. But
yeah.
when you're more open to that, you awaken. And the journey to become awake is a painful one, but because depending on your frequency, the way you can heal these dense emotions can shift. So I think, it doesn't have to be so strenuous, and even just applying the belief that it has to be painful can create pain
Oh,
inadvertently.
for
So I don't
sure.
necessarily think, I don't necessarily think it has to be this way. Everyone's process is different. But I think that it takes awareness, and sometimes awareness is uncomfortable. But from what I realized, accepting the things that I was so afraid of becomes more seamless.
Also why it's so important to have the right support system in place, not just family and friends, but also a professional. Because without it, it could be a lonely journey and it could be confusing. And somebody who's experienced it can help you way more than you just going at it alone. It doesn't, I think it's like you said, it's a painful journey, but once you move past the bump, it gets so much easier. You feel so much lighter and you could flow with life in a way that feels, dare I say, easy. You know, it's never going to be
Fair to
rainbows and
say,
butterflies all the time, but it definitely gets to be easier.
we learn in life that everything has to be hard. Everything needs to be strenuous. And that's another concept that comes to mind, which it's interesting you said, dare I say, because I think I know what you're alluding to. The idea that um in this world we're taught that everything needs to be such a process. Like
Mm.
having wealth needs to be such a strenuous process, receiving things, and you know what I mean? We're taught that. And I think sometimes most of the time, those are distortions. There's a concept in Taoism, I think it's called Wei Wu. It's basically the idea that action doesn't have to be strenuous, and it can come from a place that's more in flow. So everything you do when you're manifesting, when you're creating, you don't need to actively try to be in action. It's like think about it like this. An example is if you're trying to apply for a job, and if you're in a more relaxed and easy state, and you're in the knowing that you already have a job, right? Like, don't worry, it's there. It's like in Hebrew, the concept emunah, right? Like belief, faith. If you're in that vibration, then you're not going to try to look for the job in ways that feel tiring. You're naturally going to find yourself through your psyche is naturally going to, maybe you're going to be scrolling on a job site naturally, or maybe you see a sign somewhere, and because you're in that ease flow state, you're able to be receptive to these things and create through conscious action. But it's not going to feel strenuous. It's just like the fat that I was talking about, the weight loss journey. When you're accepting that you have this layer of fat that you don't want, that you're commanding out of your experience, but you're accepting it through loving it, through speaking to it, through asking what it's trying to protect, then naturally, harmoniously, everything, your mind, your subconscious, your body, they start to harmoniously behave in the way that naturally aligns with flow. So you start to eat differently. Now you're not eating in such black and white ways because you're so afraid of your fat that you're trying to avoid it at all costs. Because
I love
as
that.
we know, whatever you avoid, whatever you resist persists. So if you're trying to resist the fat, it's going to persist. You're just gonna, but if you're in flow, and if you're in that knowing of, I accept that I have this, I'm not trying to hide it, I'm not trying to avoid it, I spoke to it, I know it's trying to protect me, I commanded it, I said I don't need it anymore. Naturally, because you spoke to it, because you accepted it, your body knows now what kind of food makes you feel better, when you stop eating, when you feel like more full, and you harmoniously start to lose the weight. You don't have to, weight loss doesn't have to be a struggle. Wealth doesn't have to be a struggle, which is like finding the job or whatever. You can just have aligned action in life and manifest through that aligned action when you're in flow, when you're accepting, when you're not resisting. So I think that's a big concept of this idea that everything has to be painful or strenuous, and no, it's just it's wrong.
I would love to hear a little bit more about what your big vision and mission is to serve.
First of all, healing, being in the healing journey myself, because that trickles down not only to the clients, it trickles down to everyday interactions that you have with people. And we vibrationally affect people in ways that we don't even know. But I think on a larger scale, it's to really elevate the consciousness of the world as healers, as light workers in this realm, that we are given our gifts and our synchronicities and our experiences and our desires and our passions perfectly aligning to our mission in this world. I don't think it's a coincidence that I have my particular passions and my experiences. I think God, the universe, constructed this so that I can be on this mission, which is to help elevate the consciousness of the world. It sounds very general and very broad, but the way that I do it is maybe it's through being a healer, a therapist, which is part of it. Maybe I find my own modality and figure it out. The big thing, though, is that when you have a vision and a goal, and actually Mark Zuckerberg spoke about this, it's never fully formed. It's just a piece of the puzzle that keeps growing because your experiences grow your perception and grow different things, grow your insights. And so the puzzle keeps growing. I don't have the puzzle complete. I may achieve things that I never would imagine in my wildest dreams I would have achieved right now where I am.
Yes, I love it. And I love how you get out of your own way and you're not limiting yourself. What do you think your sixth sense is or your spiritual superpower?
I love that question because I love the idea of having a superpower. I think for me it's my intuition. My sister actually always recognized that in me. One of my sisters, shout out to Danielle. I have a feeling for people. I kind of tune into who they are at their core, and it almost happens instantaneously.
Oh, I love that. Who is your ideal client? What type of person would you want as your client? Who would be an aligned client, a soulmate client, if you will?
Soulmate client, I love that. It's somebody who is emotional because of my own experiences with my intense emotions and needing to transmute that into passions and things that allowed me to create from a place of expansion. I think that having a client who's really emotional and someone who needs help with channeling those emotions into a better space, I think that would be a soulmate client because I love to see myself in my clients.
Oh, I love that so much. And if people have any questions for you after listening to this podcast, how can they reach you?
Yeah, well, you can have an email. So it's racheleshwan@gmail. I have an Instagram. It's Rachel Eshwan. It's my private one. It's my personal one. I post a lot of spiritual and psychology content on there. So feel free to reach out to me there.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much. I'll put your email in the show notes and your Instagram in the show notes. And I hope that we get to do this again soon, or that at least we get to have a conversation in person. Hey, if you like this podcast episode, please download it, give us a nice review, and follow us on Instagram at Journey with VRD to get all the latest and the greatest updates. Till next week.